Hey everybody, we're the good doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I'm Dr. Kristen.
You are very, very welcome to our coverage and discussion today. We are two PhDs, we are giant nerds, and we are obsessed with talking about culture, popped and lived. We've channeled all of this together to form the basis for the work that we do at Abbey Research because we really believe that curiosity can change the world, and that when you pair curiosity with empathy, those superpowers lead us towards building more inclusive communities. We celebrate our nerddom and have conversations about culture in a whole cornucopia full of topics, from everything to systemic and internalized misogyny and male violence against women, to the joy of Hallmark Christmas movies and what we can learn about society by watching them, and throw in a little taste of what race looks like in Bridgerton, and you'll get an understanding of just what everything that is in that cornucopia. We love to chat to each other. We do it all the time, every day. We turn on recording devices so that you lovely people can join the conversation with us. So make sure wherever you're listening to this that you like and subscribe, click the bell, follow, and comment with your thoughts and feelings on our many, many thoughts and feelings. We would love to hear from you.
This video is the full season 1 recap of our coverage of Marvel and Disney's The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, now titled Captain America and the Winter Soldier. We will do, this one's a lot more thematic. We're not going to really do necessarily a blow by blow because we're definitely going to miss things, but we're going to be talking about the major machinations of this and kind of what we think, as well as our hopes and dreams for season 2. So let's get started. All right. First of all, for anyone who is joining us just for this video and has never met us before, we are not only like giant nerds, as Dr. Erin said, we are different levels of nerds as well. So especially around Marvel and around actually everything. We kind of trade off the person who is the most passionate and the one who like supports the passion. So in Marvel, I am the one who is active in fandom. I write fan fiction. I help run fandom events. I am a big participant in Marvel fandom and have been for a couple of years. And so I viewed Falcon and Winter Soldier both as a just human person who likes television and watching both Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan do things, and also as a member of this fandom who writes Bucky as a character fairly frequently. Dr. Erin enjoys Marvel and has seen all of the movies, some of them several times.
Many times, yeah.
But does not engage with fandom, the fandom community past that, except through me when I tell her about the happenings.
What I need to know, yeah.
Throughout the series, I did fandom corners, kind of checking in and saying what fandom was doing and how fandom was feeling. And I'm going to do a couple of those here to kind of give the broader nerd perspective, as it were, of what's happening, of what we think and what we hope is happening. I'm not speaking for fandom. I'm speaking as a person who participates in fandom. But I think one of the biggest arcs, and let's go ahead and talk about this right now, Dr. Erin, right out of the gate, is that Sam starts the series by donating the shield, violating Elder Wand principles of who owns the shield, but that's okay. Donates the shield, and at the end of the movie at the end of the series, is identifying as Captain America.
Yeah. And that's one of the ones where we said in our episode by episode coverage, we all knew this is where it was going, right? Like, this is where they had to get in this season. Because we know Marvel and Disney are so kind as to give us schedules for all of the planned entities and when we can expect them. So we knew there's another Captain America movie, despite all of the speculation around Chris Evans returning as Captain America, he has steadfastly denied all speculation. So we knew where we were going with this. There were parts of it that I really enjoyed, the storyline. There were parts of it that felt weird. We know the season was impacted by the COVID, as all television filming was in 2020 and 2021. But so we're not sure what was planned and what wasn't in it. But I think they did a yeoman's job with Sam. He had to do a lot of mental work to get around the idea of being Captain America. I absolutely adored how they connected him and Bucky through this idea of whether Steve was right. And how that was both of their insecurities in different ways were tied to this idea that, much like the Elder Wand, Steve, old Steve handed it off to Sam. And so I thought they handled that well. We get the introduction of Isaiah Bradley, who's a man who was a soldier, much like Steve, given the super serum, fought along in a lot of American wars, fought the Winter Soldier, all kinds of things, until he returned back to a country that turned him into a super soldier, and then that country incarcerated him and experimented on him for 30 years. So Isaiah has some thoughts and feelings about the American institution and superheroes and Captain America. And I liked that we got him as a counterbalance to Sam being like, well, like, I'm not going to be Captain America, but it's not that bad, right? And Isaiah's like, no, dude, it's bad. It's really, really bad.
We talked about too that Sam is not like a bad black man, and that he's not engaging. In order to be in the military industrial complex of the Iraq War and Operation Freedom, there's probably a lot of cognitive dissonance. You just have
a lot of mental gymnastics.
And this just wasn't how he saw the world. It doesn't mean that his view is wrong, but it does mean that he needs to expand his to include Isaiah's. In a way, Sam had to embrace an empathy exercise. And if he was going to step into the being of Cap, he goes like, if he's going to be Captain America, he's got to be Captain of all of America. He's got to hold all of the garbage. And a big first step of that is acknowledging that there are multiple ways to be a black man in America, and multiple ways to feel about the shield.
Right. That, and that's so important. And I was just thinking too, as we're filming this, a conversation that I saw over the weekend with two Black scholars and journalists, Nicole Hannah-Jones and Ta-Nehisi Coates, talking about the idea of Black folks serving in the military. And as a particular white politician, who I don't remember the name, and even if I did, it's not really the point, said something about how can you serve a country that you hate, in a way that was like, why are you talking about being in military service if you hate our country so much, in a derogatory way. But we do know that Black folks and Indigenous folks have always had the highest numbers of service in the military. And so they were both talking about it. Nicole's father was in the military. That was the whole opening story of her work in the 1619 Project, was talking about her father proudly hanging the American flag outside of his home, and how sad that made him as a Black man who was then treated the way he was by his country. So I'm really glad they brought in Isaiah. And we talked about this when we talked about their first meeting, that they didn't say one was right or one was wrong. And that's the point you made as well, right? Like, these are the experiences of humans who identify as Black, who've both served in the military and have very different understandings of what it means to do those things and be those humans. I'm glad they brought it out. It was clunky at times with Isaiah towards the end of the season, but his first two meetings with Sam were very, very powerful television.
Yeah, and I think as well, another element of this is that it was a good example of a seamless way to integrate the comics without alienating non-comic watchers, non-comic readers, I should say. And there's a lot of ways that you can do the integration of a book or a comic series or a longtime fandom. A poor example that we bring up a lot is Game of Thrones. and all like the backstory you constantly have to know to understand what's going on and all of this kind of other stuff. And there was also some there's other bad examples of like, well, you would understand this if you had read issue number blah 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 blah.
Right.
Who cares? Two strong examples of how to thread this needle are both Disney's recent Mandalorian series, which does this for Star Wars, in which if we were covering it, these roles would be flipped. Dr. Aaron is much more active in knowing the lore and the mythos and everything else of Star Wars than I am. And then this show, which we both think threaded the needle very well. There were lots of little moments, lots of little everything, but it also reminds us that comics have always been political. And so Marvel Comics has been playing around with what Captain America is, what Iron Man is,
what superheroes are.
What role does the Hulk play? Let's talk about Black Panther. I mean, Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a run of Black Panther. It's my favorite run. But the all of the different iterations of these people. Steve shows Steve Rogers as Captain America. There are cartoons as well, by the way, that are canon. Like all of the different ways that canon and like becomes Captain America, you have to also bring Isaiah Bradley into the mix. When we talk about the super serum, you have to bring some of these other things in. And so understanding the totality of the Marvel canon, which you never can because it's like 60 years of 400 million storylines, but we've never really brought in the comic past in this way before.
Right.
And I'm glad that we're doing that moving forward as we dig into the less popular parts of the canon commercially, to do some other things.
Yeah, and I think like, I think Marvel's done a pretty good job of it, of threading that needle, even in the films. As a person who has long loved the Marvel films ever since the first Iron Man come out, and watched pretty much all of them multiple times except Dark World, because
that's the one we don't talk about.
We don't talk about Dark World. I've just replaced it with Ragnarok. I just forget about Dark World, and then I'm like, I'll just keep, what I feel like watching Thor? I'll watch Ragnarok.
Which is ironic, by the way, because I'm in fandom and I never rewatch the movies unless they're on television. Like I never sit down and go, you know what, I'm gonna watch this. It's just funny how different people interact with art. It makes me laugh so hard.
Yeah, I am an absolute rewatcher of films. I rewatch things all the time. But I, as a person who didn't know a lot of the comic book stuff in the films and in the shows, I think they've done a really good job of not alienating people, but also keeping comic book fans and fandom fans happy. But I think that, this discussion about Sam and Isaiah brings us to one of the bigger themes of this season as well, is who is a superhero? What does it mean to be a superhero? What does it mean to have the serum? And exist in this post-Snapshire world, where there weren't borders and half the population was gone, and now there are borders. And we get this through a lot of this discussion through one of both of our favorite villains, the villain we love to love, really, Helmut Zemo, Baron Helmut Zemo, played expertly by Daniel Bruhl. Like he just chews up everything and spits it out with finesse and elegant fur collars.
Yes.
But I loved, because he's not new to this rodeo, and his through line in Civil War was a lot of the damage that superheroes do, obviously, for what happened to Sokovia and his family. And so to bring him in and have him keep sprinkling that in and be the one that destroys most of the serums and kills the doctor that was recreating it again for the Flag Smashers and the Power Broker and whoever. I really enjoyed that. And I think his character arc and presence in this season, I thought was really good. I don't think any of it really came out as clunky, except the one time when Local Cap thought it was cool to just handcuff him to a pipe and leave him alone, because that was just stupid. But that wasn't Helmut Zemo's fault.
That was Local Cap. So that let's talk about Local Cap. That segues pretty well. Let's talk about John Walker.
We need to talk about John Walker.
We need to talk about John Walker. So a couple things. We still don't know his wife's name.
Nameless black lady.
Nameless black lady.
Marvel.
Okay, Marvel, sure. I've said it many times in this recap series. I have ranted about it in fandom spaces and at dinner with my husband. That my poor sweet long suffering husband. The serum, the way that Erskine made it is that it brings out what is already there. Mm-hmm. Nobody else that has ever done anything with this serum seems to understand that.
No,
they don't. It's not like a tabula rasa super soldier factory. It still is interacting with humans, which is why Erskine was so picky about who the first person was. And it had to be Steve, and it had to be this person who was a mediocre soldier, not even necessarily a good one, but a great man.
A good man, yeah.
Man. And that is, I think that John Walker is probably a fine man. I think he's got a lot of trauma. I think he's got a lot of bullshit he's never really dealt with. I think he had a ton of pressure on him. I think he was all of this kind of stuff. But if we're going to just be honest, he didn't have the internal character that Steve did. Mm. And so he was able to be, I mean, the US government would have never picked Steve.
No.
Abraham Erskine picked Steve. And even the people like Howard Stark was paying for this whole thing, and he was pretty skeptical. So
yeah, that's such an important distinction, and I don't think we brought it out.
Oh no, we probably didn't before.
As explicitly,
never picked Steve.
No, and they wouldn't have. Even back in 1943 or whatever, they wouldn't have picked Steve.
He was committing a crime constantly by going to all of these draft offices and lying.
Yeah.
He was committing light treason.
Yeah.
No, they would never have picked him. They would have picked John Walker.
Yeah.
And so that's who they did. They picked the person that on the outside, and there's a great biblical allegory here, but they picked the thing that makes sense on the outside and not the thing that makes sense on the inside, because governments and institutions are never interested in nuance. They're never interested in humans. They're interested in power and systems. That's what they're always interested in. So you have Erskine versus the US government choosing the caps. And
the government as an institution knows that it keeps its power and status through symbols.
Yep. And propaganda
and traditions. And so when they looked at Captain America, that's what they saw.
Correct. And
didn't see any of the inside of what Steve Rogers was that made him Captain America. And that was the downfall in selecting John Walker, because John Walker visually looked like that symbol.
Yeah. And Wyatt Russell auditioned for Steve Rogers. He was in the running at some point, not in the finals. But and when you look at what Chris Evans looked like when he got cast and what Wyatt Russell looked like when he got cast, they were pretty interchangeable. They've matured differently, but they were pretty interchangeable at the time. I can get it. Casting, and Chris Evans has talked about this openly, that playing Steve Rogers made him a better man. That isn't who he was necessarily. That Steve Rogers was his super serum in a way. And he had to, being in this character's head for 11 years, made him lead to what he's doing now, which is political activism, which is very much a Steve Rogers thing.
It's a very Steve Rogers thing.
Starting point, which is what Chris Evans is doing now, is 100% what Steve would do if he lost the serum, but was still in 2021. It's just 100%. But less punching Nazis with fists, more punching Nazis with words. So it really, really falls in line.
Chris, if you're looking for a new tagline, Dr. Kristen just gave it to you.
Just for you, since I know you watch all of these.
All of them.
The thing with John is that he was set up to fail, because all symbols are set up to fail.
Yeah.
Steve was even set up to fail by the US government. He was not a USO showboy, and that's what they wanted him for. They just wanted the symbol. Yeah. He's the one who made himself into a soldier. It was him and Peggy Howard when he went to go rescue Bucky. And he joined the Howling Commandos kind of against military order.
Yeah, nobody wanted him around.
They didn't think he was a soldier. He was their show pony.
Yeah, nobody thought he could actually do it.
And I don't think anybody told Wyatt that he wasn't a soldier anymore. Or sorry, John, he wasn't a soldier anymore. He was a symbol.
Yeah.
And so he kept trying to behave like a soldier, but a rank and file soldier, even somebody as obviously he had a lot of medals, like he's done some shit. I don't know what he ended up as. I can't remember if they said, but like no one can be a symbol and a soldier.
Mm.
You can't be both of those things. Not in the way that the government, any government, not just the US government, not just the way that any government needs that to be. Rosie the Riveter was fictional for a reason. Uncle Sam is fictional for a reason. These cannot be real people. And so John Walker was set up to fail. And then when he failed, as he inevitably did, spectacularly so, and on TikTok, by using the shield as a blatant murder weapon against a disarmed innocent. He was cast aside as collateral damage in the way that all military industrial complexes will cast aside problematic people.
Yeah, and we talked about it when we talked about in our episode 4 coverage, but it bears repeating again, I think. And into I can't remember if it was episode 4, I think it was episode 5 where he has the tribunal, meets before the council.
Yeah, maybe. Because the end of episode 4 is when he uses the shield.
When he uses the shield, yeah. So to give us that scene in episode 5 where he stands up before that council and says, "But I am what you made me. Like all I ever did was what you asked of me. This is what soldiers do."
They're like, that's not true.
That's not what we do.
That's not what we asked you to do.
And we say this all the time, but the institution always protects itself and always has and always will.
As well.
But I'm glad they gave us that scene. The parts of his story that were sped up for whatever reason, presumably COVID, that were clunky. I'm glad they gave us that acknowledgement that. And we talked a lot about it when we did our episode 5 coverage, that he's a very different soldier than Steve Rogers was, and coming from a very different American military. And like, that is really important distinction to make when you're looking at, all the derogatory terms we had for him as low-cal cap. He was set up to fail in a lot of ways because the institution didn't understand that distinction and, didn't really care because they just wanted the symbol because they thought it would look good. But I'm glad they gave us that scene, and his arc at the end, we talked about it in episode 6, was messy. But Sam was always going to do what Sam did. And presumably if this continues, we'll get John Walker as US agent. That's certainly what they were setting up with Julia Louis-Dreyfus and his poor nameless wife. But I would love for them to explore that more. Because I thought Wyatt Russell was definitely up to the task. He did a lot of Elizabeth Moss level face acting when he wasn't given as much time or dialogue as his
screen time
as his character probably needed to do that work. He did a lot of work with what little he was given. So I would love to see that continue.
And speaking of somebody who has done a lot of work with a little bit given, let's talk about Sebastian Stan and Bucky.
Heyo! What a trend. Man, it's almost like we planned this, but we did it, y'all. We just work so well off each other. But let's talk about Bucky Barnes.
I could talk about Bucky Barnes for conservatively like 18 weeks, but I will narrow things down. So one of the fandom corner, one of the things I love about Bucky and exploring about Bucky's character is that we don't know him super well before the war. We know a couple things really intensely. We know that he has no interest in following Captain America anywhere, but he'll follow Steve Rogers anywhere. We know, and that's why he never really talks about Steve as Cap. It's always Steve. This was his best friend. We know that he spent most of his childhood keeping Steve Rogers alive, and that was a huge part of his 20s, probably his teens and early 20s. And that when he enlisted, he seemed pretty suave and proud of it, but like there was a draft, like he was always going to go to war. And that the thing he did the night before he shipped out was that he went to the Stark Expo. So we know he's a little bit of a nerd. And these are kind of just the things that we know. And then he died on a train. He was originally kidnapped and tortured. And that's where we think he got some of the super serum. And then he hypothetically died. Everyone thought he was dead. And then he shows back up as the Winter Soldier, who has been a brainwashed hyper assassin who has been in and out of cryogenic freezing for 70 years. That's a lot of baggage that they haven't covered in the DSM.
Yeah, he's come by all his trauma so honestly. Poor 107-year-old Bucky.
Poor 107-year-old James Buchanan Barnes. So he also has, throughout, when we meet him, he has a metal arm because his arm fell off in the train accident. And by the time we see him in Falcon and Winter Soldier, he has a new vibranium arm that was built for him in Wakanda. We also know that he struggles with who he was, who he is, how to marry these things, even before this show, because he intentionally put himself back in cryogenesis until the Wakandans could figure out how to get the trigger words out of his head. So within Bucky's character, these are just the things that we know. Sebastian Stan had something like 13 lines in the MCU after the first Avenger. And he managed to create kind of this whole guy who is one of the most, like, a lot of people are big fans of Bucky Barnes.
Yeah.
As well. And he did that as well. What I appreciate so much about what they did with Bucky's character in this arc is that we got both the physical implications, even though they didn't deal with them, the physical implications of what it means to have an arm that is removable from your body, and the emotional implications of what it means to figure out who the hell you are and who you want to be. And Bucky is the most extreme case. None of the murders that he committed were his choice. He tells Tony in Civil War that he remembers all of them. There's lots of debate in fandom if that's even possible with the cryogenic freezing and everything else like that, or if he just told Tony that to make him feel better, whatever. Regardless, all of us have to struggle with versions of who we were that we're now ashamed of. Something that we did when we were younger that keeps us up at night. And now, increasingly, as the world is changing and we're having to face like that, we used to be accidentally racist or misogynist or ageist or ableist or something. We're having to face new information about who we are. Bucky is almost a good example of how to do that, which is just face up to it and then figure out how to move forward. You cannot ever excuse away what he did. You can explain it, but he knows he carries that stain. Yeah, he was Hydra's fist. Yeah, he couldn't do any of this, but he can say that until the cows come home.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. He knows that he carries these scars in his body, and the body keeps score. The body remembers trauma, both to you and that you perpetuate to other people. The body keeps track of it. And so that he did this arc to understand why. I don't think he probably understood why Steve gave the shield to Sam fully. Or if he did, then he got really confused when Sam gave it away.
Yeah, no, I think he did because at the beginning, because when in that scene, Bucky's there and like the look on his face is like, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, they talked about it. Like that's some fandom speculation. Like Steve told Bucky that he was going back to Peggy and that he was giving Sam the shield, and that nod is that Bucky knew.
That Bucky knew, yeah, and I believe that. And I think, for him, it probably felt like a settled.
Yeah, that's true. You're right. Yeah.
And so, I was just thinking about it now as you said it. Like, think of how emotionally jarring that was for him to hear, because he wasn't at the ceremony at the Smithsonian, but to hear that Sam gave up the shield. And to be
he might not even heard that he gave up the shield. He might have just seen John Walker holding it and been like,
yeah, maybe he missed the Smithsonian news and all he saw was the new Captain America as John Walker in this like low-cal discount version of his best friend. Like, no wonder he gets very upset, and we get the couples counseling session that the two of them have. Because I think his whole basis on figuring out who he was post Winter Soldier stuff was that Steve always believed in him. Yeah, like that's the thing that he had. That was his like anchor. was that Steve was the best person he ever knew. Steve always believed in him. And so Steve had to be right. And like, what if Steve was wrong? Was just like throwing the biggest spanner in the works possible.
Yeah, I mean, the Winter Soldier broke his programming because he recognized Steve Rogers.
Yeah.
So, like, Steve Rogers has always been the plumb line to Bucky's humanity. He's been the tether. That's And so if Sam is saying that Steve was wrong, about something that he's wrong about him, and that's, the meme has been memed and the fics have been written, but that scene is the core of what Bucky is doing this season in the couples counseling. So that then when Sam steps into who Bucky always knew he was going to be, because I think part of why Bucky says, "Why'd you give up the shield?" is he knows Sam doesn't have an answer.
Yeah.
Like, he knows Sam doesn't really, even if it's not conscious, like, he knows Sam well enough to know that Sam doesn't really know why he gave up the shield. And so Bucky just keeps pushing him. And like, you notice throughout the entire, like, he just keeps saying, "Why'd you give up the shield?" And Sam doesn't answer him. Like, Sam just changes the subject or does something else. And Bucky's like, "Why'd you give it up? You got to go get it. What's wrong with you? You got to go get it. Like, come on. So he goes to get it. And then Bucky's like, "Okay, now I know my role.
Yeah.
Settled. I will find you a new uniform. I will be the human jungle gym for all the children in LaCroix, Louisiana. I will do this. I will do it." Cool. Now that we know who Cap is, we know who the Winter Soldier is, and we can figure that out. Now, tiny gripe. If Sam got to change his name, Bucky could have. It should be Captain America and the White Wolf at the end of it, because Bucky is no longer the Winter Soldier.
He's not the Winter Soldier, folks. We showed that he's not the Winter Soldier. He can have a new name too.
Yeah. Of course, we talked about this in the episode 3 recap when we discussed it, but the fact his relationship with Wakanda will need to be explored further. Wakanda is the place that brought him healing and kind of brought him back to himself. Bucky tending goats is a really fun fanfic trope that I cannot encourage you enough to engage with. There is art of like Sebastian Stan hanging out with goats. Guys, it's so precious.
What could be better than 7 goats?
Oh my gosh, so many goats. So and they're just like, this is where he found himself again, between the Dora Milaje and Io and Shuri. We got the trigger words out of his head. He became whatever the next version of this person inhabiting this meat sack is, because he's not James Buchanan Barnes anymore. He's not really Bucky anymore. He's something else. So, but then he kind of screws with them and does some stuff with Zemo that they don't really like, even if maybe the ends justify the means. The Dora Milaje is not cool with it.
Done waiting. They are done waiting.
The Dora Milaje story. But then he gets Shuri to create the suit, the new Cap suit, which it's the only people who have created Cap suits are really, like, the combat ones are 2 Starks and a Wakandan princess. So it's pretty cool that we're expanding the geniuses within the MCU. Always happy to do that.
Yeah.
But they did not tell him very clearly by the look on Seb's face, they did not tell him that they built a failsafe into the arm and they can disactivate it if they want to.
Yeah. That was, we talked a lot about Bucky grappling with his trauma throughout the season, and therapy and what it looked like to reconcile who he was and what he did and who he can be now that there's no Steve. And that was something that the show didn't address, was the trauma of having his arm deactivated. That was a shocker. That was a shocker for everybody.
A lot of ability advocates on the internet that were like, you can't just brush over that.
Well, they did that without consent and knowledge.
And they did brush over it. It wasn't a thing. So it'll be interesting to see if that ever comes up again. My guess, knowing Marvel, is no. Yeah, they dealt with it already, Kristen. It's fine. Yeah, it's fine.
It's fine now.
But also, hopefully now we saw a little bit of the charming 1940s Bucky when he was flirting with Sarah. There's elements of this humanity that is coming out and coming back, which is going to be really fun to play with.
The boat montage was pretty great.
Loving the boat montage.
I
love that the two of them have settled into this teamwork brotherhood thing.
Yeah.
and they can now go forward in a whole lot more strength together. They always physically fought well together. They were able to read each other and all that kind of stuff. We even saw that in Civil War when they hated each other. They were still very effective against everybody but Peter, because who expects webs? No one. No one expects webs. Which is why Tony brought Underoos to the fight, because no one expected webs.
I love that scene so much.
Yeah. Oh man. Civil War makes me angry in my soul, like in my core. But this fight scene, and then like when they're like, "Hey kid, where are you from?" Like, "Oh, I'm Queens." "Oh, Brooklyn." Like all those little moments.
Oh, so good. Yeah, absolutely. Tom Holland's like voice acting in that scene is the best. I remember, hilariously enough, as a tangent, since we talking about Civil War, a 30-minute conversation I had once with your husband about what it would actually happen to destroy that airport, and like what the disruption it would have caused to the world had that happened. And Marvel being Marvel just brushed over it and moved on to the next scene.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of there's somebody who's very famous in fandom for talking about how Tony would possibly get insurance for Stark Industries as part of the Avengers, and like talking about the insurance premiums that SI would have to pay to rebuild New York every time. I mean, but yeah, John and I are the people that walked out of Superman versus whatever with Michael Shannon and the Man of War or whatever that movie was. And was like, that was 700% more property destruction than the city of New York could handle. Yeah. Like that was our first reaction. Like, we are those people. So the other kind of storylines, just to blow by them, if you are watching this to remind yourself what happened in season 1, Sharon Carter comes back. We find out that she's the power broker. She's also now been pardoned, because unlike everybody else who fled with Nomad Cap, she hadn't been pardoned. And so she is now pardoned and is now again a CIA agent, or whatever is now
government agent. Yeah,
in the government. And is evil. So that's a thing.
That's a thing that's going to happen again.
The major big baddies of this season, the Flag Smashers, are ostensibly over because their leader was killed in season 6, in episode 6. But their big question was essentially, what does humanity look like now post Snapshot? And how do we do resources, and how do we do equity? And it appears that a lot of the international government responses to post Snapshot has been to get more nanny state and more militaristic and more, pseudo-fascist in some ways. And so it's going to be continually interesting to see this post-Snap world. We got a couple other kind of pieces of what it looked like in day-to-day life in Far From Home.
Right.
With Peter and Ned kind of talking about the fact that, Aunt May now runs a charity for people. Like the Snap thing will continue to be a thing, as it should, because half the population was gone for 5 years. Why they didn't use the time turner to go, that's a whole other thing. But they were gone for 5 years. And that's going to continue to happen, especially because as we continue to address the social ramifications of what heroism and superheroes and the super serum is, we're going to also have to address the social ramifications of the Snap.
Yeah. So we got a lot of big picture themes from the Flag Smashers in terms of terrorism and all of these global politics and economics and refugees and displaced persons and all kinds of things, which in a way was better at globalizing some issues that Marvel tends to be very Amerocentric with some things. So that was a little bit more global politics that they did a pretty good job with. We get the introduction of Julia Louis-Dreyfus as Val, whose character in comic canon can at times also be Madam Hydra. We don't know what she's doing, but she's messing around with John Walker and his nameless wife. So I don't think they're going to waste Julia Louis-Dreyfus going forward. We haven't seen the last of her and what she's doing. In the extra scene, end credits scene, Sharon Carter calls someone.
Yeah, and I think it's her. That's my theory.
Yeah, I think it's Val as well, to tell them about her new exciting position in the U.S. government. So we're not sure where we're going with that, or where the baddies are going in the Marvel universe we have quite a schedule of upcoming shows and movie properties with
So
which
much content.
so much Marvel content. And as we said at the end of our episode 6 recap, we're not sure when we're filming this in July of 2021, if we're getting a season 2, when we're getting a season 2, what it's going to look like. But Dr. Kristen, let's fantasize. Let's map this out. What's on our vision board for season 2 should it happen?
Bucky and Sarah need to date. There needs to be smooching.
How many fun scenes would it be though? Like Buck drives up in a truck to like pick her up from the house, and Sam's standing on the porch, like,
yeah, with a metaphorical shotgun. Yeah,
Maybe
I also want Sarah and Sam to rebuild their relationship.
Yeah.
But like one of my Black friends who watches the show said Uncle Bucky will be the only white boy allowed to bring potato salad because Sarah taught him how to make it.
Correct.
Because he doesn't know how to do anything, so they're just going to teach him like how to exist. I want to see a Bucky Barnes shopping in a Piggly Wiggly, please and thank you. Like, I want domestic. I've always wanted domestic Avengers. That's what I don't care about fight sequences. I never have. It's never my jam, which I know is funny to hear from a Marvel fan. But like, I live for the tiny moments of like that Bucky read The Hobbit when it first came out.
That was such a great line.
Those are the moments I live for.
Such a great line. Yeah, I mean, like one of my favorite scenes. I love the fight scenes. I've always loved like action and adventure. I was raised on Star Trek, a steady diet of Star Trek and Star Wars.
A steady diet of romance novels and Broadway musicals. And baseball. Those were
mine. Fantasy and sci-fi was what I was reared on. So I love a good fight scene, but like one of my favorite Marvel scenes ever is the after credits scene of all of them sitting around eating shawarma.
I know, it's the best. And in Endgame, my favorite is when they're all laying on the table trying to figure out how to do things, and like Steve makes peanut butter sandwiches because that's all he knows how to make, even though he's terrible.
Or when they get really drunk at the party at
Ultron,
at the end of Ultron at Stark Tower. Like, I love that. Like, more of that always.
Always domestic Avengers. So yes, I want Bucky figuring out being part of the debate of like which is the better supermarket, Publix or Piggly Wiggly. I want them bitching about Zemo. I want them trying to figure out Sharon. I want the buddy cop thing. I would love it if season 2 was entirely about the two of them bringing down Sharon and watching them try to figure out how to. I want a confrontation between Sharon and Bucky where he snarls at her that she doesn't deserve the same last name as her Aunt Peggy.
Oof.
That's what I want.
And I think that's, to me, more interesting for where to go next. They certainly spent more time on Power Broker than they did on Val. Yeah. So I think she's going to be a background player for a little while before they bring her in.
I think she's going to be in other things too. Like, I think she might be in the movie, and then
so maybe they just introduced her so that when she comes in one of the movies, we're all like aware of what's happening. Kevin Feige has a plan. He's got a whiteboard with it all written down, folks.
So
somebody has to keep track of it, and he certainly is. But yeah, I think that's what I would like to see for season 2 is like Lethal Weapon style, Top Gun style buddy comedy, like buddy cop, snark, fight scenes, smooching. And I think it's really interesting if they gave actual time and space to Sharon Carter and the decision she's made and why she went from being a like dedicated US agent.
Yeah, to the extent where she would kiss her dead aunt's ex-boyfriend.
Thoughts and feelings about that.
For anyone listening on the podcast, I'm just grinning into the screen. I have so many thoughts and feelings on Sharon and Steve. So many.
Yeah, but we did get the fantastic, the inklings of Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan's chemistry in the Volkswagen Bug because of it. So I will never be sorry.
That's true. Yeah.
Because that just makes me smile just thinking about it.
And the callback to that in this series was great.
Yeah.
Can you? Yep. No.
It was so good. Yeah, so I think she's got, enough lineage in the Marvel universe, being Peggy Carter's niece, but also I think it could be really fascinating, and like let's let Emily Van Camp like off the reins a little. Let's
Yeah,
let her go. She's always had more talent than I think people give her credit for.
yeah, there's always hints of it. I'd love to see a scene with her and Nick Fury, like going back and forth. And now in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we know that Fury, at least one version of Fury, is a Skrull. So like, what is that going to look like, and how is that all going to happen? So like, I would love that. I would love the big bad to be the power broker, and the conversation of what happens when your government fails you. Do you then tear it down?
Yeah,
Which,
yeah,
like, because hers is obviously out of a betrayal, the way that she snaps, like, no one pardoned me. And I love that they took what I'm sure was a plot hole in the movie, like no one just remembered that Sharon went on the run with them, and turned it into an entire motivation of a character. I love that.
yeah.
And this, I will speak for all of fandom and anyone who watched Civil War. I want Tom Holland, Anthony Mackie, and Sebastian Stan in a scene together again.
Oh,
The three of them give each other so much shit on press tours. They are so much fun together. Those three, please.
please and thank you. It's again one of the gifts of press tour that might be dictating a Marvel
Take it. I'll take
content, because none of us knew the magic of Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan until they went on a press tour together. So just throw Tom Holland into that, and it's like it's the trifecta. It's genius. I'd love to see him on the small screen. I'd love to see him come in and do some of that stuff. I think they did a good job in the Spider-Man films of doing everyday Avengers.
Yeah.
Like, because he's figuring out who he is. Like, the nature of Peter Parker's storyline is that he can do a lot of everyday lived stuff. Going to high school and, falling in love and
Yeah, and I mean, like, in the bigger conversation of like, what do I want from Marvel? I want a conversation between Sarah and MJ about MJ's hair, and like, how does MJ handle it? And like, I mean, I just like all of this. They all connect in my brain.
Yeah.
So I want them all to be actually connected.
That would be swell. While you're taking notes, Kevin Feige, from our discussion, please and thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's where I'd like to see a season 2 go. Obviously, there's more to do with John Walker, especially if he becomes U.S. agent. I'd love to see them explore that more and bring in other things. It's always a crapshoot with Marvel because they love a plot hole, and they create like Grand Canyon sized ones, and sometimes they fill them and sometimes they don't, and it seems very haphazard at times. So these are all the things we hope and pray for as fans of Marvel, on different levels. So yeah, I don't know if we have any other loose ends from that season in terms of what we would want to see for season 2. I think
the Isaiah Bradley's grandson, who's been hanging out in the comics, he goes on to be in the Young Avengers with the aforementioned, who I talked about a couple episodes ago, Riri Williams.
Yeah.
So I'd love to see him more kind of coming into that. Also, Torres, we didn't talk about Torres.
I was about to say, we didn't talk about Torres, and he be in the comics, in a comic version, he becomes Falcon. Like, I think that's obviously where they're going, because like Sam left his wings and then got new ones from Shuri.
I love that, like, Bucky is not the Winter Soldier is not the sidekick. Like, the Falcon is, like, Falcon and Captain America fight together, and then Bucky's out there, I don't know, like, being Uncle Bucky at the cookout. Like, there's other options for Bucky.
We can find other things for White Wolf.
He doesn't want to kill people anymore, and he shouldn't have to.
He shouldn't have. He's been, as he tells his therapist, he's been fighting for 90 years.
He's tired. He should get to retire. There should be Mai Tais.
That's a long time. Just let him fix boats, man.
Yeah, maybe he wants to learn how to fish.
I don't know. Just let the man have a break, and he can come in when Sam needs him for things, and then he can go back to the boats.
Yeah. And to his delightful girlfriend, Sarah.
Make it happen, Marvel. But yes, I do hope we get to see, I don't know what will happen with Isaiah Bradley's grandson. That'll probably be more down the line, but I liked the guy they had for Torres. I liked his dynamic with Anthony Mackie. Apologies for not remembering your name, young man.
Joaquin something or another. I apologize. Yeah.
That's a good name. I love the name Joaquin. Yeah, so hopefully it would be cool to have like dueling Falcon and flying Captain America in the air. Those would be some fight scenes. I would love to see two people with wings. Kind of like when we got a whole bunch of Iron Mans, or like Rhodey and Iron Man.
When War Machine and Iron Man were fighting together. Yeah. Iron Man 3 was fun with that. Like,
I loved Iron Man 3 with all the, yes. Oh, it was so cool. So like give us some of that. I'd like to see that. So hopefully we get more of Torres, because he seems like a nice young man and he's pretty. So
because we have to balance those things all the time. Aesthetics are important.
I'm just saying for myself.
Totally fair. So friends and neighbors, we are sure you have thoughts on our thoughts and feelings. This is the very first time we have recorded an entire series and the recap before releasing any of them to you.
Any of them at all.
It's going to be really interesting to kind of.
That's true.
Like, we're not going to get a chance to respond to y'all in that way. So obviously we will be responding in our lives on Facebook or in some other ways. Maybe if we've got a lot of questions, we'll do another live just for all of you who have been interacting with us.
That would be cool. I like that idea.
You're bringing up for this season, because we're recording this in July. You're going to be watching this in September. So we hope that you've enjoyed these 7 episodes of us talking about a show that lots of people would say is meaningless, and we found deep, deep, deep and beautiful meaning in.
Y'all, we had a lot to say.
A lot to say. From here on out, we're going to be spending the rest of the year doing a cornucopia of various documentaries around different marginalized stories and marginalized communities. Before, don't worry, we'll be diving back into the Hallmark Cinematic Universe as well.
Got you.
Enjoying films from last year and this year, and talking about the importance of structured and bounded joy and what that means for humans and what that means for America. Hopefully we get more Lifetime and Hallmark same-sex couples. There was some delightful representation last year. We're hoping for more this year.
Yes, please.
And in the meantime, you know where to find us. If you're listening to this on a podcast, please rate and review it on Apple Podcasts, or follow us on Spotify, or however, whatever service you're listening to, you subscribe to us. We'd really appreciate it. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that thumbs up. The algorithm is obsessed with it. It would really help us. Subscribe and hit the bell so that you don't miss any of our content. This is not the only kind of content provision we do. We have lots of conversations around culture, both popped and lived, on a lot of different facets, and we'd love for you to join us for all of them. I think that's it for now. I will forever remain a Bucky Barnes stan and Dr. Kristen.
I will forever remain Dr. Aaron. I don't have a favorite Marvel character, you guys, but I love them. I love the Marvels.
We love them all, and we can't wait to have Kit Harington and Richard Madden enter this universe in the Eternals. We're very, very.
My life has been sadly lacking in Kit Harington content, so bring it.
He'll probably know more than Jon Snow this time around, knowing his character. So, all right, pals, whenever we see you next is when we'll see you. Thanks so much.
Take care, everybody.